Should you main Marasai in Gundam Evolution? So we're talking about this character today. I'll go over all the little things about it because I did play a decent amount of this character and I liked it, but you can decide that for yourself. So starting off, Marasai is a hook-based mobile suit. It also has a mid-range hit scan weapon, but its main source of damage is hitting the hook, pulling them in, and hitting them with the melee beam blade ability, and then finishing the kill with a primary fire. Marasai has 1200 hit points, which is 20% more than average, and it also has 2 dashes, which is pretty good considering it's a tankier mobile suit. As I mentioned, it plays primarily around its hook and the ensuing combo, but its primary fire isn't limited to close range like a lot of other hook-based characters tend to be, like Roadhog for example. Marasai plays his hook role as a sort of damage tank hybrid. It has the option to play as a tank in the core of its team, threatening space around where it can hook, but when something like a Sazabi can play that role better, it changes and will play more of like a flanker. So if you like these kind of hook-based characters like Roadhog, then give it a try. So how good is it? Marasai is receiving a buff to its hook from the network test. I should say this, but it was arguably the second worst mobile suit during the test. So I don't know, just because it's receiving a minor buff to the speed of its hook doesn't really make it too much higher than what it was before. The thing is, Marasai didn't have the utility or HP to tank properly, so it struggled to secure the kills at hooks. You'd hit a hook and you'd start killing it, but the enemy would just start looking at you, fire a little bit, and you were dead. It was kind of sad. The core issue with all of this is that you barely have more HP than other damage characters because all the characters are more standardized in this game. So you get burned down. And the hook beam blade shot combo requires a headshot to kill, so you weren't even getting them consistently anyway. It only does a damage total of 1025. And in general, it just doesn't have the damage of a DPS character, which it's kind of being forced into that role because it doesn't have the taking capabilities. It does 215 damage with the body shot and 325 to the head. So you either 5-shot body shot to kill 1000 HP target, or you do 3 headshots and 1 to the body, which if you're comparing that to an ARC 78 dueling a Marasai, the ARC 78 only has to hit 3 headshots to win, whereas the Marasai will need 3 headshots and a body. And if you're looking at it like that, ARC 78 also has its shield to block the hook and save itself if it starts getting attacked. You would essentially be put in a situation a lot in this where if you tried to duel them with your primary fire, you would lose if they were equally skilled to you, and if you went for your hook and missed, you were just going to die anyway, so it was a lot of high risk situation. However, it does have a high skill cap, as there are very neat techniques that you can do with its hook. Things like dashing backwards or to the side when you get a hook, it pulls the enemy in towards you, so there's a lot of really cool things you can do. So that's something that's really, really exciting, and I want to play around with that a lot when the game comes out. In general, though, Marasai did have good movement, like I said, and if you're good with its hook, you can find good value, but what you're going to be looking at is just not getting as much value for your skill as you would in another character. So, yeah, having said that, its ultimate is solid. But essentially, if a player is really good with the character, they can push it to a higher level, but as I'm mentioning, it's just going to be a struggle to get it there. So, in regard to skill requirement, Marasai does have a high mechanical skill requirement. This high mechanical skill requirement also has a big price to pay if you mess it up, because missing a hook in a 1v1 means you die. I do compare this character a lot to Roadhog, and in a 1v1 in Overwatch, if you miss your hook on Roadhog, you can probably just walk away. But in Marasai, you will die. So it's a big necessity to hit that ability correctly. In the network test, hook was a long and awkward cooldown, and it was pretty hard to hit. When you triggered it, it had like a wait time before it shot, and then it took a long time to pull enemies in, so it was kind of strange. It has been sped up and buffed, like I mentioned, with the buff they did to it, but it's still a skilled projectile ability. Comboing it into Beam Blade and deciding how to dash with it also has a really high skill, like I've been mentioning, whether you dash and then hold your Beam Blade until it gets close and then shoot them in Beam Blade to push them away, or turn them to the side and Beam Blade them into your team. Like I said, there's lots of options. You can even use the Beam Blade earlier to pull them into it and then shoot them afterwards. There's a lot of really interesting things you can do with it. However, moving on from the actual mechanical skill to the game knowledge, it's still not the most game knowledge intensive mobile suit. More so than it should be because it's underpowered, but it essentially just hunts kills. Either you hunt kills at the core of your team, and that's how you create space. You threaten enemies by hunting kills in the middle of your team, or you go on the flank as a flanker. And that's not the most hard to understand sort of thing. It still requires understanding of how to do it and when to engage, but it's not as game sense intensive as something like Sazabi is, because Sazabi has to commit itself to get these sort of things going. There are lots of little important micro knowledges that'll push its skill up a lot, such as how your hook will pull your enemy, like knowing if you could dash, whether it would break on the wall, whether you should what you should do with it exactly. Should you turn it? Should you look up, look down? That changes where the hook enemy lands afterwards. And there's lots of different things you can do. Its ultimate requires like some knowledge, but it's not that complex. Just throw it into a group and call it good. Will Marasai get buffed or nerfed? As I mentioned, it is already getting that buff to the speed of its hook, which will allow it to secure kills better and risk itself less, but that doesn't really change its skill level or its level as a character too high right now. It doesn't make it so much better. For the average player, as I mentioned, it was about the 13th weakest character, which is pretty bad. So something will be changed. I'll be releasing a full analysis video on how I think Marasai should be changed later, so make sure you guys stick around on the channel to check that out when it gets released. But I personally want them to modify its tankiness and give it a capability to increase its tankiness with a mechanically based ability, maybe with something about landing its hook, something like that. But likely we're just going to see some subtle changes to its damage numbers and its tankiness. They might buff its HP up to like something like 1400 and just call it good. Now that would help the character a lot, but that's not what I want to see them do. They may also, unlikely, but they might nerf out the dash text. A lot of times companies will look at a character that has some sort of weird little text like this and just nerf it out of the game. It's always a bad thing when they do that. And I don't really think Bandai is going to do that because I think they have a very community-based way of looking at the game. I think that's their goal. So I'm not too worried about that, but they still might do it. The ultimate won't change. The damage numbers on Hook and Beam Blade will probably stay the same, but they could maybe also get a slight buff so that you don't have to one-shot. You don't have to headshot to one-shot a 1000 HP mobile suit. Like the Beam Blade, the close range melee ability, might get a buff by about 100 HP. 100 damage, sorry. So, moving on from this, how fun is Marasai? It's really fun if you're good at it and you enjoy hook mobile suits, and it's not fun if you can't land your hooks. The combo is honestly one of the cooler techs in the game, just by how malleable it is and how much you can do stuff with it. Since, like I said, choosing to Beam Blade before or after your shot, choosing to do it right as you hook so that you pull them into it, max range, dashing, pulling them into your team. Like there's so many cool things you can do, and I'm sure there's even more that I didn't even find in limited time I got to play the character. It's just, yeah, this sort of thing, having these sort of really unique techs just can honestly make people addicted to the character. However, in practice though, it's just rough to play because it's so weak. You have to really enjoy this type of character a lot to want to play it before it gets buffed. You will find yourself being punished for playing well by landing hooks because you get focused down and killed right afterwards. You will lose 1v1s because your character doesn't deal enough damage, and you won't really be able to tank well enough as you would potentially want. So for a final rating, it gets a low C tier because of it being so bad. If it were buffed, then this number would increase to something like a B or a high B. However, Marasai is just going to find itself getting low value at most ranks. It scales poorly overall because what happens is that players get a lot better as they increase in the skill ratings. And what this does is it makes them respect the threat of the hook a lot more. At lower ranks, people don't respect the hook as much, and so they don't think it's an issue, so they don't protect themselves against it. But better ranked players get like a disproportionately better understanding that they need to avoid it, and because of that, it gets harder to play these sort of hook characters. The thing in addition to that, though, is at lower ranks, people's aim isn't good enough to justify playing this character because you won't hit the hooks very often. So essentially what you're going to see is MARASAI having a weird little curve of being best when it's a mid-rank character, which is kind of strange. The only redeeming quantifiable qualities it has overall is that it transfers well into other mobile suits. It transfers decently well into other mobile suits. It seems a little bit weird, but there is crossover with Sazabi for the main tank playstyle. So while they look a lot different and they play a lot different, the core way of thinking about them is similar. But most of the crossover will come with things like RX-78 having a very similar aim style, and then something like Pale Rider 4 having a similar partial playstyle of flanking. But in general, these aren't this sort of transferability isn't justifiable enough as a sole reason to play it, because if that's a situation, then you should just go play those other characters as the main. If you've chosen MARASAI as your main, then make sure to check out my MARASAI mobile suit guide. In the video, I talk about its abilities, its strengths and weaknesses, when to play it, and how to play it. I'm sure you'll like the video a lot, guys, so make sure to check it out.